So thank you again for being here today and welcome to Tenant Talk Live today on housing preservation through tenant engagement. And for folks who are new here, my name is Sid Betancourt and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a project manager for inclusive community engagement at NLHC. And for folks who might need a refresher, you're currently joining Tenant Talk Live, where we provide opportunities for you all to connect with one another and with NLHC, share best practices, and learn more about how to influence federal housing policies that can also help in your communities. And for just an FYI, this meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded up to YouTube afterwards. So just know that this is like a public space. But we do have an awesome guest joining us today. But before I pass it over to them, I will go over just some brief announcements and updates. And I'll begin by always doing our community agreements that we put together at the beginning of every year. Give me a quick second to put that on the screen. All right, so the first one being the platinum rule, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. So in other words, please be considerate of how others want to be treated and how that might differ from how you want to be treated. And again, I already said this, but mute your mic except when speaking, listening with an open mind and empathy, taking up space and making sure to give space to others. And then again, this meeting is being recorded. So if you want a copy of this, feel free to let me know and I can send this to you, but these are our community agreements. If you have any additional feedback, feel free to email me and we'll drop my email in the chat shortly. Awesome. And then this is a reminder, if you're signed up for NLHC emails, you should be receiving an email this Friday titled The Connection. This e-blast is going to contain all of the recap materials for NLHC calls for the week, including Tenant Talk Live. So keep an eye out for The Connection, which should come out this Friday, October the 11th. And we'll drop a link in the chat too to sign up for emails if you don't know if you're signed up or not. And we'll also drop a link to last month's resources and recordings so that you can see that if you didn't get to see it last month. And then it's October, which means 2025 is very, very near. And around this time is usually when we do our feedback survey. So I want to invite all of you here and for any of your friends that you know that might have attended a Tenant Talk Live in the past to participate in our feedback survey. And your input would be really helpful in helping us plan for 2025. So we'll drop the link to participate in that survey in the chat, but just know that it'll close at the end of this month. So share it out to anybody that you know that's attended one of these this year. And then lastly, just some logistics. Again, if you just making sure that folks are staying muted if they're not speaking, and please make sure that if you have any questions to drop them in the chat. We'll likely have time at the end to also have people come off mute. So raise your hand if you want to ask a question out loud. But without further ado, I'll introduce our guest for today. We have Jessica Szuminski from the Housing Justice Center. Jessica joined the Housing Justice Center as a Housing Justice Litigator in September 2022. And before working there, she spent a year as a law clerk in Hennepin County Juvenile Court after graduating from the University of Minnesota Law School in 2021. So she has a lot of experience working with folks who come from households with the lowest incomes. So she has a lot of experience with the work that we do here. So I'm really excited to have her talk about the work they're doing there today. And I'll kick it off to you, Jessica.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here with everyone today. And I will admit found it daunting at first that I was invited as a speaker because I don't feel like I'm an expert in anything. And I maintain that today as I am here with you all. I am not an expert, but I do have experience doing some things, and I'm eager that sharing about my experience can be helpful to others. So I'm very happy to share. And if I know some of you, that's really exciting. But it's too many names right now for me to filter that at the moment. Um, I don't have a PowerPoint, so if you're someone who prefers those visual signposts, I'm sorry I don't have that today. But what I do have is uh, kind of how I'm imagining this outline is that the important things to me to share with you all boil down to three important factors. One is knowing your group, who you are doing this work with, how you are structuring yourself. Second is knowing your community, identifying who, like what population and what the realities are within that community. Like if you're in the city, what is City Hall like? And then three is knowing yourself, because if you are showing up to try to do this work, the best way we can all do that together is knowing ourselves first, and we're the only ones who have access to that, or have the best access to that. Um, so first, within the theme of knowing your group, um, I'm a member of the Housing Justice League, and the Housing Justice League is a coalition of a lot of community-based organizations in the Twin Cities area within Minnesota. Some of our orgs are hyperlocal, like neighborhood organizations, and some are on a grander scale, like my organization, the Housing Justice Center. We do cover statewide concerns. But in this case, we've joined together with the niche of our group, the Housing Justice League, wants to pass TOPA in Minneapolis, and we want it to uh, not have unnecessary concessions of like, we know at this point, like through our experience of like what matters to our community and making sure that we're not engaging with yes, thank you, Sid. We're not allowing concessions that fail to serve the needs of our community. And yeah, TOPA is a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. This means, for just a very, very brief summary, is like if a building that tenants live in is going up for sale, the tenants get notification first that it's going up for sale, and then it includes processes for how the tenants could buy their building if they want to and if they can, and trying to help them find access to the resources so they can. Um, and part of why this is so, why we've identified this as so important in Minneapolis is because knowing our community, um, one of the biggest things plaguing Minneapolis right now is big corporate landlords buying up single family homes. Um, the big corporations who do control the housing stock, just being able to decide willy-nilly what is happening with their tenants' homes year after year. And a lot of tenants just being shut out of the conversation and being shut out of the opportunities of um, what it means to be part of the community they live in. Um, there's also some big infrastructure changes coming up in Minneapolis that advocates are desperate to um, get ahead of like we don't have a super big train network for public transit, but one of our trains is being extended. And so that extension is naturally going to involve a lot of chaos and displacement potential for the tenants and businesses along that corridor. And we've had some really impressive folks in town who are making sure that the city can't forget about the people who were there. And so uh, this whole process has taken a while as well. Um, our org coalition first formed in 2018, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. It's close to that at least. And so it's before I before I was here, it's before I even was a lawyer. I was not done with law school yet. And so the folks before me spent a lot of time getting to know how we wanted to be a part of our community and engaging it. We spent a lot of time doing like group retreats of like planning out our decision-making models and feeling comfortable with like everyone's capacity to participate. And then because of all that work that the folks before me did, it gave us the power of natural turnover in organizations or capacities of grassroots tenant organizers to to plug in and just start where it was left off before me. And I think there was just such supreme value in that of um I didn't start this group. I have no ownership of this group, but they set it up in a way that like once I was in a had a seat to join the table was ready to go. And yeah, it's been really chaotic as well because in knowing our community, we have been trying several different ways to get TOPA. First was a very strict of like, okay, we've already had the tenant engagement and like stories from folks of like what it's like on the ground. So let's just pester City Hall and get this done. And unfortunately, due to a mayor and administration who were very anti-TOPA, it kind of broke down. And even though we got the city to have a draft, they were just like, okay, we have a draft. And they stopped there. And so with us, just as community organizers, there's nothing more we can do when the entities that have control of that draft, that language, we can't take their arm to sign it into law, you know? And so we realized we needed to rework our strategy to apply that pressure in some other way that made them feel like they had to sign it themselves and it wasn't us controlling them to sign it. And so we switched to a much more community movement building approach. And so for the past year and a half, we've been intentionally like reframing our work around building a movement for community ownership and engaging with residents as often as we can, as deeply as we can, to get their perspective of like what does that mean to them, like, and a lot of folks, of course, have never heard of TOPA. And so trying to like, if we can suggest this tool that people haven't heard of before, but and get them excited about it, like just how much power that kind of movement and natural grassworks wave work can do so that once the community's key, like once we've hit that key threshold of people engaged, then the city council has to listen to us because if they don't, they'll get voted out. And politicians are gonna politic. So it just like we didn't give up is kind of what I think the important message of that is, but we also didn't rush anything. And even though it's aggravating to realize that Minneapolis, which is often like I know the Twin Cities, we have a reputation of like being on the progressive side of like tenant rights and stuff. And even in a community as uh with that reputation, like it's taken us 6 years to still not have TOPA. And um it it's very likely that we can get it next year. We finally someone on city council was able to get the idea that COPA was going to be a better thing to do, which is the community opportunity to purchase. It's very similar, but instead of tenants getting the info, it's normally nonprofit organizations. Part of why our coalition never focused on TOPA is because the nonprofits are part of the issue in our community. Um, and like those tenants are the ones who aren't being heard and don't have safe, healthy housing. And so just giving them more unrestricted access is not
Oh, Wanda Mercado.
sorry.
Oh, sorry, Miss Jerry. I think we you were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry. I'm very easily distracted. I apologize. Um, But yeah, and so like now that we're on this edge of we might be able to get COPA to happen this year, our position is if making COPA pass this year is what our city government needs to feel brave enough to try TOPA next year, then sure, we'll support it. We're not going to stand in your way if that's what you, the city, think is needed, even if the community disagrees. Um, yeah. And oh, I see. Do you want me to look at the questions now, Sid, or should I wait for the Q&A?
If you want to start answering some of them, yeah. And I know you said you might have invited some folks too to speak if you wanted to bring them up.
Yeah, I, if you're here, I can't see you guys, but you're welcome to come off mute, but I don't see any of my coalition members just with a quick glance. Um, yeah, and I think, oh, you know what? All of these questions are they're super important, and all of these questions are like part of why it's taken us so long to even just get TOPA passed because everyone's so involved in the like, oh, well, if we don't have financing or we don't know, like we don't have a manual yet for how it's going to be implemented, we can't create this right. But then we don't like they're not gonna make the manual or make the access to financing unless the language is written down in a statute saying they have to. So it's this like vicious cycle of like what needs to come first and um it, you just we can't let like people can't access a right unless it's made a law that it is a right. And yes, we need funding, and yes, there needs to be infrastructure so that we have answers to the questions of like, do they become a nonprofit or like those logistical parts. But uh, yeah, it's just too chaotic in trying to convince the government to just name this as a right. And so that's why we're so okay with just kind of going along with COPA because we're hopeful that if COPA works, or at least they see it doesn't cause an implosion in the city's housing infrastructure, that they'll realize it's okay to just start somewhere with TOPA. And the benefit of legislating is we can change it. We can make it better the next year. Just because we made it happen one way once doesn't mean it is stuck like that forever. If it did, our lives would be a lot more miserable. Um, and yeah, I think uh yeah, we definitely like I think that's one thing that we've the question was like about if we know where the funding would come from. We certainly have ideas and we have hopes where there's like local land banks and community land trusts and stuff. But at this point, we're not we acknowledge like the limit of like we aren't experts in those areas and we don't have the orgs who do that part of the housing cycle. Um, so we don't like I personally can't like feel comfortable saying this is what we should do because we've just that's not what we know. We can say this is what we need funding for, and then the city that has experience of like how they budget things and where money comes from, like they can be the ones who have those resources to plug the money into um this right for TOPA. Um yeah, which coincidentally ties me back into my third point of knowing yourself. I have gotten a very recent crash course in knowing myself, and it's made um, being an effective advocate, I think, that much easier of like knowing what I want and knowing what I can do, not what I think I should be doing is very important. Um, and I've been very lucky that in a group as well formed as the Housing Justice League, that I have the security of knowing if I say I can't do something, that like the group will figure out, like the group will be fine. That it's like I'm not the end all be all. I'm not Superwoman. Um, I recently realized I am actually the only attorney that regularly shows up to our coalition meetings, which is weird and also makes me feel more imposter syndrome of I shouldn't be the one talking to you here. Um, but the point is like that's okay because I wanted to help and I want to be able to use the skills I do have to help my community. And like when your whole group is on board with that concept, it helps make sure no one's in danger of burnout. I know we have probably all heard that term a lot as community advocates and like um those of us doing the work we do. Um, but if we all just run ourselves into the ground, then it, no one, nothing can happen anymore. Um, and so we don't want that to happen. And that kind of like confidence in ourselves and confidence in our coalition, we were able to recognize everyone was kind of feeling fatigue lately, not because of our HJL work. It was so uh, affirming of like one of our last meetings where everyone, yes, self-care, thank you, Linda. Everyone at our coalition meeting said, I am feeling overwhelmed. Housing Justice League is not overwhelming, and I feel good when I come here, but everything else is so overwhelming that I can't enjoy the work I'm doing here. And so we took a break. We're actually having a break right now from Housing Justice League, which is why I'm sure no one was able to come. Because it's very much like we were like, we're going to take October off. We're not going to have meetings. We're not going to plan anything. We identified some deadlines that are coming up, and it was very much an open invitation of if you can show up, these are things to show up to, but no one has to show up. And with that freedom, it just makes it that much more powerful when I know I can show up. Because I know this was my decision of what is truly in my power, and it it's just happier. And I know it's cheesy, but that's my ultimate goal. I just want everyone to be happier. And like, I think this is a good way for me to do it. And, um, so that I can feel happier too with the work I do. And that it's okay that it's taken our coalition this long of I've been in our group for 2 years, but I'm still happy doing that work, even though we don't have TOPA yet. Um, yeah, I think, um, yeah, that's that's what I wanted to share with everyone today as my planned presentation. I'm happy to answer. I know it was very uh just full of open rhetoric and not a lot of logistics. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions that people have. Um, and yeah, I I get so excited and I want to be able to share that excitement with everyone so that we can all be excited about the work we're doing.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I really appreciate how like throughout your whole like discussion you really brought up the theme of like humility and like vulnerability, I think too in this type of work because like a lot of us obviously care about this stuff and we like work ourselves really hard trying to get it done. So it's definitely not easy, but like recognizing that y'all needed that break, I think is huge. And you know, not everybody's gonna agree on like what the best like strategies are, but I do think that at least personally that like rest is important. Um there was there was like a few questions that came in, and I think you did kind of address some of them as you were speaking, but I think just because we do have folks here who will be watching this afterwards, so they may or may not have access to the chat, so I just want to verbally ask them, and then we can kind of go through them. And just to my colleague here who's helping me too, just keep me accountable if I skip any questions that come in after this. But so I think like the first question that we got was from Pamela who wrote like a few part question, but it was, you know, for TOPA, and obviously it's gonna look different. Like here in DC we have TOPA. And we've had it so it'll look differently by jurisdiction, but do tenants have to become part of a nonprofit or an LLC? And is it structured in a way to make it affordable for the residents?
Yeah, I think they don't have to. It would depend, of course, on how your local law is written. But our goal is that it also is that it's well catered to the size of the building. Because here in Minneapolis, I mean, and I hope based on what I was saying, it was clear that we need single family homes to be covered by this ordinance. And I know in DC, they recently got rid of the coverage of single family homes. And so it's just kind of it's going to be very dependent on the community. When it is for bigger buildings, multifamily housing, there's different models it can take. They could form a nonprofit, or what's growing in popularity is the cooperative model, where and that those uh, cooperative ownership can be structured in different ways too, of like, is there any opportunity for building equity? Is there limited opportunity? And how does that get controlled? Each circumstance is going to be pretty unique. And then it'll be, of course, if the ordinance says someone has to do it a certain way, then that makes a limit. But right now, for us, the sky's the limit because there is no rule limiting it for us so far. Yeah, and we want it to be
God,
structured
did
in a
we
way
do
to make it more affordable for the residents. That's of course one of our goals. And one of the city's biggest catching points is like, well, why would we pass this ordinance if no one who it applies to could afford it? And then they're scared to put funding so that the residents can afford it because the law doesn't exist yet. And it's just full of contradicting themselves. And so the ultimate goal would be to structure it in a way where it is affordable for the residents. We unfortunately are not there yet. And I don't know if that's something we would get in the first excuse me, if we would get in the first passage, or if it would be like once our law is passed, then the budget can come and fill in that money that we've identified as needed. Or at least once we have the law, we can go to outside funding sources and say, look at this thing. Don't you want to be part of making it happen? Give us your money. Yeah. And I'm happy to just go through the rest of Pamela's questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next question here was whose name will be on the deed? Would it pass down once a person on the deed passed on? And that would again depend on how it was purchased. If it's a like single family who buys it for their individual family, my understanding is that it would just become like any other house that like your neighbor owns instead of renting. And so it would just become part of that home ownership's world instead of the rental world. And then, but if it's multifamily housing with multiple residents involved, it'll of course depend on how that either cooperative or nonprofit structure was established.
Yay, did they show you how to
Which
have it on your app?
And I'm not, even though I'm a housing justice attorney, I know very little about deeds and that part of real estate law. Those are different kind of housing attorneys than me. Um, and then there was also a question of, are the banks involved with TOPA? Right now, no, they're not in our conversation at this point. Um, the like ones we're aware of who could be aren't going to act unless there's a law that they can act as part of. So and that could be different in a different community. Maybe your community has a bank that's different than the ones that we have in the Twin Cities. But for us right now, banks are not involved. There's also the question of, what ways can tenants find capital or financing for a purchase within the period of time? Um, and like, is it 30 days, 60 days, or different timeline? Those are questions that we fight about in the negotiation table of what we want the law to have, of like, the community knows that we need as much time as possible to access financing. But the landlords are too impatient because they've decided, well, if I want to sell your home tomorrow, I should be able to sell your home tomorrow. And there's of course there's that conflict in values, of, do we value someone's security in home more, or do we value the landlord's money book more? And the realistic aspect of, can tenants find financing, is going to be very strongly tied to the timelines that is set up in the ordinance and the funding that is either built into the law or becomes available after the law exists. So I would love to have answers to that, but we don't know yet. And then, yeah, I think I addressed the question of where we want it to come from, of like, where we know we're not experts in that. Um, Another question. Oh, Linda's question of, can you explain how after buying their building, some might be owners of a complex, but some might be owners of a complex that houses renters in the mix also. Um, I think I'm still novel at the concept of cooperatives and how that works. My understanding of like, if a cooperative is set up as like a limited ownership or limited entity, that like anyone who is like applying to live in that complex like does become some kind of manager owner. Just your you contribute, you pay for that by paying rent. um and so if there is more nuance than that, I'm just not aware of that yet, and we haven't been able to try it out yet, to figure out how that actually works. But yeah, I think a co-op would mean that people who live there are like owner managers. Unfortunately, I wish I had better information or felt more confident answering that. Oh yeah, is this someone? I'll let Sid navigate.
Yeah, Miss Jerry, if you want to come off.
Yes, from my understanding, Jessica, a co-op owner is a shareholder and they don't pay rent, they pay maintenance on the building. You can buy the co-op at a certain price, and then you pay maintenance each month on the co-op. But you're never
Mhm.
like a full-out owner. You're just a shareholder in that property, and no one can
Gotcha.
live in that unit but you. If they're
Gotcha.
on the lease or whatever, they cannot live there.
Cool.
I
Thank
think
you. That's helpful.
we have one of what's it called? We have one of our partners in the chat too, who also just said +1 to what Miss Jerry or Miss Collins just said, that as a member of the co-op, you have an ownership stake in the company. And then
Cool.
someone who's a
Yeah.
tenant can apply to reside in the unit.
Cool. That's super helpful. Thank you. I was not going to get there on my own.
Okay, that's why
Um,
we're all here together.
yeah, for sure. And then I've lost track of where I was at with questions, so I'll toss that back to you, Sid.
Yeah, there was a lot that came in too, so no worries at all. We did have somebody reach out with like a legal slash like direct assistance type of question, and unfortunately we won't be able to like answer that one live, but we can reach out to you afterwards. And we'll put like our email in the chat where you can ask that question again to the person who raised it. But yeah. I think we just answered this one too, but Linda also followed up with can a co-op have renters in an own complex under TOPA or a tenant's right to purchase? Um, yeah, I think we just talked about that. And I think this question might have been from Jose. I didn't copy the name over for this one, unfortunately, but just asking, would you be able to set up a long-term, like low-income protections for those in the local TOPA in Minneapolis? I think kind of just asking more generally if there can be like tenant protections for folks there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's where we've been focusing our energy when it comes to COPA, actually. Because we're like, well, if there are organizations that are going to get easier access to buying things for sale, we want to make sure that the entities buying things are held to a certain standard of tenant well-being. So yeah, we've been fighting for like there needs to be just cause protections for the residents. There need to be um, uh, the enforcement for like the habitability of the building of like some of these buildings they're buying might be in really bad states of disrepair. And so making sure that the landlords are held responsible for repairing them so that the tenants can live safely. And then different rent stabilization or rent control tags as well of if you're going to buy this building, you can't just jack up the rent for the tenants the next year. So that it's making sure that the tenants aren't at risk of displacement in all of these other creative ways that landlords have found to displace us. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Jessica. And then I think there was someone in the chat just making a comment, but just stating like they were curious if community development corporations or land trusts could be helpful in setting up like that financial piece, and if you've communicated with those channels before.
Yeah, I think so. That's one connection that our coalition, like we're aware of a few of the community land trusts in our area. And we're still working on establishing those partnerships because we don't want to guess what they would recommend. We want them to be able, with their experience, like be at the table to share what works and what doesn't work, and how they could or could not show up for the tenants. So that's a like connection in progress because we know it's important to I think community land trusts are brilliant and I didn't know they existed before this year. So yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, and a lot of what you were talking about too also made me think about this other organization called Grounded. I think it's Grounded Solutions,
Mm,
who does like just like community land trust work and
yeah.
just like work in that realm. Um,
Wrote that name down so I don't forget.
yes. Yeah, they're great. Okay, so then I think there were just some comments to and I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you don't want to talk about this, you don't have to, but I think Monica was also just talking about where did it go? I lost it. Um just like paying towards a building and having no say in anything. I don't know if that's necessarily related to TOPA or not, but Monica, if you wanted to just kind of share a little bit about that.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. How's everybody? I thank you for having Miss Jessica I don't want to say her name, mess it up,
Oh,
but thanks for having her on.
Szuminski, but don't worry,
Miss
I'm used
Szuminski,
to a million
yes.
variations.
Well, no, you gotta be firm in your name. But yeah, basically, renters like myself don't realize how much we pay on the property because we're constantly moving. And so basically, with me staying on the property for more than 10 years, I realized I've paid over $100,000 on rent, and yet I don't have a say or anything. And the minute I complain, I'm given a non-lease renewal. And that's why people are afraid to speak up. That's why people just sit and just don't say anything. And I do want to do a little research on the TOPA. I do want to do some research on the TOPA and bring that to the table for community partners to maybe come together and say this is what we're going to have to do, because we can't just allow for renters who are a part of the community and want and pay money. You know, I pay money. I'm not saying anybody's gonna house or anything like that, but I paid money, and definitely, you know, it's been disgrace to have to go through this, fight them at the same time, go to court, and then people are saying we're not gonna say nothing because we don't want the same thing to happen to us to happen to you. And then now they say, well, go vote for what? But anyway, there it is. I just wanted to share that because we have no say. Not thank.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. That's definitely that's part of what drives our coalition's work too, is like because of how much money and equity that we, the renters, are building for our landlords. And we like they're allowed to call themselves owners when renters are the ones who have been paying the mortgage. And why does that mean we can't be like it's just like cutting renters out from feeling ownership of where you live, your neighbors, your community, of like who you want to be. But because you have the label renter, because of just how the contracts are set up, um, like we we want something like TOPA to be able to help combat those problems that are just inherent with being a renter, because it sucks to not have that control despite how much it's cost you.
Thank you, Jessica. And if I think there's someone joining us on the phone, if you're able to mute yourself, that would be great. If I mute you, you won't be able to unmute yourself. So I just want to make sure that you're able to do that. But yeah, I think I only saw one other question, and then I want to turn it over to one of our collective alumni to also kind of share their story, because they said that they wanted to raise their hand. But the question that I had on here, and it's okay if you don't know the answer, but I did want to ask it if there were like any HUD home ownership programs, or is that only for single family homes?
You know, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I think the answer is that those programs are for single family homes. I'm not confident though. And Minnesota actually has programs like that too. We've been better about like creating new first first home buyers like assistance of like if if you haven't owned a house for the past 3 years, or like your parents or your predecessors never owned a house, then it's like you get special access to down payment assistance or loan money to make it accessible for you, because you don't have that foundation of someone in your family owned a home to make it easier to buy a different home. And I love those programs and they are great. They of course aren't enough to like replace what TOPA needs to do, because it doesn't help the tenants who didn't know their home was for sale. And if I actually just went, it feels weird not calling myself a renter anymore. I just bought a house this summer for the first time in my life. And one of the houses that I was touring because we wanted to see if we could buy it, there were tenants living there who found out 5 days earlier that their house was going for sale, and they found out 24 hours before the first showing was happening. And so even if those folks were, yeah, I see the head shake. Even if those folks in another world would like have been able to afford to buy the house, because they didn't know about it, they don't have time to get pre-approval, to check out different mortgages, to see what's a smart financial decision for their family and their well-being. Because no one notified them. They didn't have the opportunity. And so we want to make sure that tenants have the opportunity to purchase and put that in an act. But yeah, and so yeah, those kind of programs that like HUD has and now Minnesota has are super great for single family home buyers. They're just not universal or powerful enough to fix what we want TOPA to do.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Jessica, and thank you for the folks who asked that question. I think Bill wanted to share something. Bill, if you wanted to come on.
Yes, it's Bill Higgins, Homeless Advocacy for All, former collective member and National Coalition for the Homeless board member, as well as main CSC board. I have, let me come off my headset. I have the name changed a lot years ago. Every single family lot
Bill, we're
can.
having a harder time hearing you. I think it was better with the headset on, if that works for you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, if I rotate where the microphone is, better. Okay, here in Maine, they changed the laws for zoning such that every single family lot can be converted to either 2 units plus an ADU or 4 units plus an ADU. And I personally haven't owned a house since '97 with my divorce. And I was homeless 4 times. And now I'm out. I left the low-income housing unit that I just had up to last week because I make too much money. I'm over the 60% limit for the building, so I had to leave. But I'd love to buy a house with a VA loan or some other program, and then convert it into 4 units, but have the units structured such that it would be owned by the nonprofits that raise the funds to build the units. And we could set up legally so they could own those units until the end of time, and I would get the ADU that would be on the property. And here in Maine, they don't even need a zoning change to have this happen. Imagine if nationwide we could do something like that to develop each state to have this mobility of conversion. How much low-income housing could be built with some federal funds? And then there's a whole bunch of ideas, but that might be, I want to basically have these nonprofits own their own units for the end of time, and I don't need to make money off of it. I don't want to make money off of it. I want to get housing. Thank you.
I wish all landlords had those goals.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. There was a question in the chat that I did miss earlier. From Pamela that was asking, and I did copy and paste it somewhere now. I can't remember where I put it. Pamela was asking if TOPA could be found in New Jersey, and I don't think there is. I like Googled it really fast, and there was like something that I found, but I don't know if it was recent or not. I'll drop it in the chat either way, but I do think that I was like, how do I even give the best advice on how to look it up? But honestly, I think it would just have to be like a quick Google because I'm not really sure what like
I have a recommendation because there is a national like TOPA/COPA network that I'm a part of. And so I know there are people in that network who know if or what New Jersey has. I just don't remember off the top of my head. And that's oh yeah, nice. So yeah, that someone just dropped Sid dropped the link in the chat, and then there's also People's Action / policy link is they're the ones who host a Copa National Network. So if you're curious, like you don't have to like contribute anything to be a part of the network. If you just want to be able to absorb, folks are always welcome to plug into that. And if you want more direct help of getting connected with the organizers of that, I'm happy to do that like over email or something for you too. Sorry, I don't have the web page link for it right now.
Okay, I was like, let me frantically look for it, but the I am gonna share Jessica's email in the chat really fast just so that you all have that. If that's okay with you, Jessica, but I'll also make sure to include it in the follow-up email that you folks will get on Friday. But yeah, I think that's all I see. Let me just make sure. But I think that's all I see, and I think we had a really good conversation today. So thank you again, Jessica, for joining us. If there's any last minute things you want to leave us with, I think now's the time.
It was just absolutely my pleasure to be here. And because I learn as much from oh yeah, for the purpose of the recording, my email is my name, hjszyminski@hjcmn.org. My last name, though, with that trick is Szuminski. It's always so fun for me to give that to people over the phone. And yeah, I love learning from I've learned from you all as I hope you have learned from me. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so
Are
much.
you on LinkedIn, Jessica?
I'm sorry, I missed what the question was. It was bad
Yeah.
audio.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect.
We'll do that, along with my 5,000 others.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you everyone for joining us. I do have a few reminders, so don't leave me just yet. But please don't forget to participate in our feedback survey. Any feedback is good feedback. We're gonna make sure that we read through all of it, and we made it a little bit longer this year, but only because we really want to make sure that we do a good job next year. And our next Tenant Talk Live will be on November 4th, 2024. We'll drop that link to register in the chat. And for folks who might have missed it, last month we did release a new edition of Tenant Talk called Voting as Collective Action, based around election engagement for this year. And you can see the digital version of that in the chat as well. And then for folks who might be newer or need a refresher, we are always looking for blog post authors for NLHCs on the Homefront blog. And so if you want to be a part of that and you want to write a blog post about federal housing advocacy or your advocacy work, we invite you to reach out to us at outreach@nlhc.org. And then don't forget to join our Facebook page so y'all can stay connected. And post more things that you have going on locally. And then, as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or feedback. Cool. And we'll see you in November. Thanks again, Jessica, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. Have a lovely Monday night.